When I was 12, Christmas Eve was the highlight of the year in our small town of Maplewood, Vermont. The kind of place where every house had snow-covered rooftops, glowing Christmas lights, and kids sledding down the hills until their cheeks turned red. But there was one house none of us ever went near. It sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, surrounded by bare trees that always seemed lifeless, even in spring. Its windows were boarded up, and the front yard was overgrown with thorns, like it wanted to keep people out. The adults said it had been abandoned after the Henderson family moved away, but every kid in Maplewood had heard the same story. No one really left that house. That Christmas Eve, my best friend Ethan dared me to go up to the porch and ring the doorbell. "Come on, Jake," he said, nudging me with his elbow. "It's just an old house. What's the worst that could happen?" The worst? I could think of 100 things. But I wasn't about to back down in front of him. It was snowing hard that night, and the wind howled as we crept up the driveway. Ethan stayed behind at the mailbox, flashlight in hand, while I moved toward the porch. The closer I got, the colder the air seemed to get. Not the kind of cold from snow, but something deeper, sharper. When I reached the door, I hesitated. The old brass doorbell was covered in rust, and the wooden door looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Just as I reached out to press it, I heard something from inside, a faint rhythmic sound like humming. I froze. "Ethan, did you hear that?" I whispered. "Hear what?" he shouted back. "Just do it." The sound grew louder and my heart pounded in my chest. But I pressed the doorbell anyway. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the humming stopped, and a soft, shuffling sound came from the other side of the door. The porch light flickered to life, casting long shadows across the yard. Ethan yelled, "Dude, the light!" "The light's on." Before I could respond, the door creaked open, just a crack, and I saw something. A face, pale and wrinkled, with eyes that seemed too big for its head. Its mouth stretched into a grin that didn't look natural, like it had been forced. "Who's there?" The voice rasped, each word dragging like it hadn't been used in years. I stumbled back, but the door slammed shut before I could scream. The porch light flickered out, and the house fell silent again. I sprinted back to Ethan, who was already halfway down the street yelling, "Jake, run! Someone's in there!" We didn't stop until we reached his house, panting and shivering. When we told his dad what had happened, he gave us a look I'll never forget. Fear mixed with something else. "The Henderson house burned down 10 years ago," he said slowly. "Nobody's lived there since." We swore he was lying, but the next day I went back. The house was still there, but it looked different. The porch light was gone, and the door was sealed shut with rusty nails. And on the snow-covered steps where I had stood the night before were footprints, my footprints. But there was something else, too. Another set of prints, smaller, like a child's, leading away from the door and disappearing into the woods.